Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Dr. Josh Segal, who is a senior advisor to a number of Department of War leaders across policy and the services. He recently returned from, I think you said 11 speaking engagements in Europe and North America, focusing on hybrid warfare and other topics of immediate interest. Josh Segal, welcome back to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you. And most people don't know, I guess they don't know me as Josh, they know me as Bugsy. So I guess we can kind of call me whatever I feel like today, but thanks. I appreciate it, John.
Yeah.
I just got back from Ukraine too. So
yeah. Well, so to our people who are keeping track, I think this is your third one. So like I've said to a couple of other guests, after five episodes, you get a gold jacket, but we're not there yet.
Wow.
A couple
like Saturday Night Live.
A couple more to go. Yeah. But so to our audience, I guess this can be thought of partially, at least, as like a sit rep on Ukraine. And we're recording this, by the way, on December 12th, 2025. And link in the show notes to a recent article that Josh just put out. It's in the Washington Times, entitled "Ukraine Offers a Roadmap for Faster and Cheaper Battlefield Innovation." And so I'm going to title this episode, Josh Segal on Ukraine, Electronic Warfare and Fast Battlefield Innovation. But if we could start, Josh, just by getting your hot take on where we are right now strategically, and then we'll start getting into these topics.
Yeah. So strategically speaking, we expected, and what's been happening is the Russians are trying to create the narrative that Ukraine is losing the war. They are far from losing the war. In fact, one of the reasons Putin is so desperate for this peace proposal is he's in a position where he is really on his back foot, both militarily and economically. And that's typically what he does, is when he's in a bad spot, he tries to negotiate to reset the playing field. And that's kind of really where we are. If you look right now at the situation on the front, yes, Ukraine is losing territory periodically, but most of the time that's an intentional technique they use, because they really value human life and they don't want to waste life on territory they can't hold, and just let the Russians come in. But right now, the Russians are losing many orders of magnitude, number of people and equipment to what the Ukrainians are losing. And frankly, I would say that the Ukrainian people are pretty resilient, pretty fed up. The power is only on pretty much 8 hours a day. Businesses and hotels are running on generators. The sounds that when you walk around the streets are the humming of generators. And when the lights go out at night, you'll see entire apartment blocks that are just black. And but they are just still having fun, laughing, and Christmas time is coming, and Father Christmas is out there. And in fact, in Lviv, where I was on my way out, there's a place called Lviv Croissant. And they have Happy Christmas croissants, people dressed up as croissants, greeting children who are laughing. And I think this is one of the things is I perceive that a lot of people think of Ukraine as being this desolate wasteland of destroyed cities. It's not. I mean, Kyiv is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, as is Lviv, and they still look very much like European cities, with people, children, women, old ladies walking around and just trying to live their life, with some really interesting motivational posters. And when you get off the train, for example, at the border, they everything is about the war. The entire narrative is about the war. So the train, when you get to the border with Poland, they say, "Thank you for riding Ukraine rail." They kind of say, "This is how dignitaries come into Ukraine, and hopefully we'll be running again to Mariupol, Donetsk, et cetera, and bringing back our 4 million evacuees." So they're on point, and every day at 9 o'clock in the morning, the alarm goes off on the phones and around the area, and everybody, no matter where you are, stands for a moment of silence, kind of like morning colors, and they get out of their cars. So it's an entire culture of resilience. Um, and but at night things get a little different, and it's it's rather loud.
Wow, I can only imagine. Uh, would you characterize, at least partially, what Ukraine is doing as like a defense in depth kind of a
Yeah,
strategy?
sure. So as I've mentioned before when I spoke out at IndoPACOM, um, first of all, I think so many times about civil defense in the United States. So everybody in Ukraine, when you go there, you have an app on your phone, and it's in English as well as other languages. And funny note is on the English one, it's actually Mark Hamill from Star Wars' voice, but it sends you alerts that many of which are crowdsourced of what's going on. So the first alert is there's an air attack warning, and it can be from anything about from a MiG-31 going up, which is the launch of the can launch Kinzhal missiles, which can hold the whole country at risk, or strategic aviation. But then, and everybody knows, okay, don't go to the shelter on that one. Let's see what happens next. And they go to Telegram, which, oh, by the way, if you're a DoD traveler, you can't download Telegram on your phone, which is just brilliant. But you can watch for alerts and see what's happening, and you can actually watch the Shahed drones flying because they're kind of slow, and see where they're coming and make your decisions about when or if to go to shelters. Generally speaking, I don't go unless it's a ballistic missile attack. But then it also gives you another alert if there's an imminent air alert in your immediate vicinity, because there's acoustic sensors and jammers on on virtually every imaginable surface around the cities. So if there's an air alert and you are depending on your GPS for anything, your phone as a map or in a car, you're pretty much out of luck for the 10 plus hours of the attack. And then, of course, if your car or whatever piece of equipment you have depends on using GPS or locational services for any kind of its other functions, you've pretty much screwed up the car, because the car thinks you're in South America. So the Ukrainians have apps for first aid, but they really use Telegram to keep you informed about virtually everything going on, so that you can protect you and your family. And they're very open. There's not a lot of hiding about what's going on in the war and the conditions and the attacks. And then there are posters all around that say, "This is the life that we're trying to live," with different kinds of everyday life. But it's very much an entire mobilization of people. It's to the point now where even if you're trying to transact business and you don't speak Ukrainian and they don't speak English, even if both sides speak Russian, they will not speak Russian because they find it so repulsive. So God, you don't even try to speak Russian. They just would rather draw pictures of stick people than do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's then out. You start moving out from the territorial defense, which is kind of like our Minutemen, and those are people like, there was one young woman I met out in Kryvyi Rih who was a kindergarten teacher before the war, who now is a frontline fighter, and she still has the giddy, funny personality of a kindergarten teacher. And then, of course, you have the regular forces, of which they also now have the unmanned forces. And there's a whole national mobilization of technology called the Brave One program, which we can talk about a little bit during this program if you want.
Yeah. Well, we've had over 200 Cognitive Crucible episodes, and none of them have really unpacked or discussed electronic warfare and what it is, why it matters. I think this might be a good opportunity to do that, and maybe
Sure.
help set the stage just a little bit, Josh, for the key points that you want to pass along
Oh,
during
absolutely.
this sit rep.
Sure. So, it's funny. a lot of us have taken electronic warfare for granted and assumed that we all had our act together. And I mean, I was an information warfare officer for most of my career, and I owned the electronic warfare suites on the ships. They were under my supervision. And it was always kind of a given that we could do what we needed to do and that we would be fine and that we would jam everything and that we had our way of working on the battlefield would go just as we thought. But now there's more and more evidence coming to the fore that us and our NATO partners have kind of fallen behind on the electronic warfare bubble, and innovation's making it move so fast. So in a nutshell, for those who don't know electronic warfare, it's actually pretty simple. It's use of the electromagnetic spectrum to achieve effects on the battlefield. So for purposes of this, one of which is spoofing, convincing a system that it's not where it thinks it is, and you send it kind of off its intended target. So it has to go to such and such GPS coordinates, yet you make it think it's in a different GPS area, and it goes off course. That's so you spoof it. Jamming is, of course, disconnecting any kind of communication between it and its source, or it and a satellite. And then, of course, there's jamming radios, et cetera. And then there's, of course, finding where the signal is coming from, tracing back and killing the signal. The problem is this all creates a cycle of measure, countermeasure, and then countermeasure. And unfortunately, what we've discovered is that our highly technical weapons that are built according to very specific standards don't do well in that environment, because and I've asked several of my colleagues about this in the US, and they said that, well, that's understandable, because we always assumed that we'd come in with the harms and our systems and control the entire environment. Well, so you take out the basically, if there's a big, heavy, multi-million-dollar system and it's emitting, it's dead anyway. So you can't, that's being taken care of. The problem is when you start having systems that are dispersed on the battlefield that cost $20, $30, $40, $100, and they're everywhere, and you can't take them out to where they're even worn on individual soldiers. So the GPS jamming survives. And it's something that our weapon systems weren't designed to handle, and that the Russians could actually direct on these things. So there's no necessarily, they do it for a short time and you can't counter target or whatever. But right now they say that the typical half-life of any piece of gear on the front lines in Ukraine is about 6 weeks. That's just for purposes of putting this into realistic numbers. As those of us who have ever dealt with the contracting process in the U.S. government, is you don't even write a requirement by that point or have any kind of intent to do a contract in 6 weeks.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, but the Ukrainians and the Russians as well, I would imagine,
and the Chinese and the Iranians, they're all learning from this.
Well, but just sticking with the Ukrainian war, both on the Russian side and the Ukrainian side, would you say it's safe to say that both sides are innovating quickly in order to
absolutely
attempt to, in the pursuit of their goals?
No, absolutely. So it's one kind of quick example that's not electronic. It's actually pretty straightforward. So the Ukrainians designed something that's called the Dragon drone. It was dropping thermite and other flammables on trench lines and tree lines to expose the Russians, and it's kind of like a flamethrower drone with less extinguishable fire. Well, that's great. Now 6-7 months later, the Russians are using that same drone technology to burn the drone nets that have been laid across the counter drone safety corridors for logistics that the Ukrainians are building. So they flipped it on its head and now using it against the Ukrainians. So now the question is, what's going to be the countermeasure to that? Who knows? But it's even gotten to the point where they're using drones as mobile IEDs. They'll park a drone on the side of a road, and then when the convoy passes by, chase it and destroy it. It's pretty impressive. So, but yes, the Ukrainians and the Russians are all learning, and they're kind of bouncing off each other to do these things. The Russians were the first to introduce the fiber optic drones to overcome the jamming, even though the Ukrainians knew it was going to be an issue, raised it to their leadership. We tend to portray them in our media as perfect, but they weren't. Their leadership didn't listen, and so one of the reasons I think it was Adivka started having problems was because of the unjammable fiber optic drones. So now there's all sorts of technologies being developed and innovated to deal with fiber optic drones, to include like putting tungsten balls on the battlefield so that when the fiber hits the ground and it'll melt and disconnect. But literally you go out on the battlefields there or near the battlefields and it looks like it's covered in spider webs, that's how much of this fiber optic is being used on the battlefield. And I mentioned this before one time. So the general rule of thumb is it's 4 kilograms of fiber for 10 kilometers of range. So you can kind of work that out to what is the size of the drone frame, what is the size of the munition it's carrying or payload, and then the battery power and battery size.
But why does the battlefield look like would you say spider webs?
Yeah, because all the fiber optic cables that have come out of these spools from the drones, it's so intense and so many of those drones are flying, they just land on, it just covers the battlefield.
Oh, okay. Maybe I wasn't following along, or
Yeah. No, it's okay.
I'm not sufficiently tuned into what is happening. So I'm not understanding what you. So
Oh yeah.
back
So
back in the day, I'm dating myself, but
it's
into
like a tow missile.
right. That's exactly what I was thinking. A
It's like a tow missile.
tow missile. So the fiber optic cable is part of the guiding system for these drones.
That's right. So
Okay.
they have a thing that looks like a bottle underneath them from which this fiber optic
Ah.
spools, and then the operator communicates with the drone so that it can't be jammed or necessarily detected because the RF signature is so low. And that's one of the big things they're trying to deal with right now.
Oh, that's so that okay. I'm a slow learner, but I am a learner. I am a learner.
It's
Okay, so
okay.
I get it. So the fiber optic cable is part of what makes it not jammable, at least currently.
Correct.
I
At least
see.
currently.
Yeah.
But it's also not just jammable, but it also doesn't emit the RF that allows
Mm,
you to detect a drone coming in. So it comes in quietly and silently.
hmm.
And all you can hear is by the time you hear the motor, you got to be taking cover.
I see.
So
Gotcha.
it's been, but both sides are very, very active and they come in kits. So when you get a drone,
Hmm.
you know, on the front line, they actually have drone laboratories and they they actually can have, okay, I have a 10 kilometer spool, a 20-kilometer spool, a 50-kilometer spool, and then you kind of have to figure out these drones don't come pre-assembled. You have frames, you have batteries, you have all these different things, and you mix and match payloads and drones and spools to fit the mission. And these are all done by each unit has a frontline laboratory that does a lot of this work.
Got it.
And they actually have a competition, by the way. This is kind of cool. It's kind of like, do you remember that Stallone movie that back when you and I were young, Death Race 2000 or whatever it was called, where you got points for like running over a grandmother and, you know, with a baby, you got 500 points or whatever. I mean, that's kind
Uh,
of sick.
I'm
But they have
afraid I'm
some,
afraid I do not know
well,
what you're
you're
referring to, but
lucky, but
yeah.
you know, if you ever made those jokes like, hey, if I hit that person, I get 500 points, right? Well,
Hmm.
they actually have something like that. So they have a website, which I'll talk about more later on, which is called the Brave One Marketplace, where they can purchase um, equipment, and you can buy it not only with hryvnia, which is their money, but you can also buy it with points, and you get points for destroying a Russian tank, eliminating a Russian soldier. The most points are given for rescuing a wounded soldier, and you can exchange this for equipment. And so they actually have competitions between the units to see who can make the most points. So they've gamified it, which is kind of sickening if you think about war and killing, but it actually works. And the unit that continually takes top place is called Magyar's Birds, which is Robert Brody Magyar, who's kind of or Magyar Brody, who's the head of the unmanned system forces or uncrewed systems forces. So yeah, you could, any of us can go online and see it. It's Brave One. Google it up and look at this, and you'll see they actually have the scores like the screen of a video game.
Right. In your article, again, linked
Yeah.
in the show notes, and you're going to have a couple of other articles coming out. So
Yes.
people keep a lookout for other articles from Josh. But in your article, you sketch out um, uh, the ineffective or the surprising ineffectiveness of some of our uh, you know previously
Some of our,
go or all of our or a lot of our
all of
like
our,
go-to systems like the
yeah,
high Mars rockets 10,
yeah.
10 estimated what 10%
Yeah,
effectiveness.
everyth's dropped down to about 10%.
Hmm.
So when they were first coming out, they were the go-to. There's a reason you don't hear about them as much. And it's kind of funny because um, Deputy Secretary of State Chris Landau was just berating the Europeans for not buying American arms. Honestly, after our performance in Ukraine, I think it's kind of ironic, to say the least. And especially then after Dan Driscoll, the Army Secretary, said, I wouldn't buy from our primes because they're conning people. So our messages are kind of across there. But literally, our weapon systems have been dropping off because they were all based upon GPS. And in a GPS jammed or EW intensive environment, our weapons have been generally dropping off after about 3 weeks. So once the Russians have a countermeasure, then there's not much one can do without going back to the U.S. and getting some modification. And
Hmm.
to some extent, they've been doing it. But the way that we've all trained for these modifications is usually, okay, we go and we take out the jammer. Well, you can't take out the jammer at this point. It
Do you,
doesn't work.
do you think, Josh? I mean, just for again, for me, maybe a lot of
Yeah,
other people are following along, but okay. You've got so a high Mars rocket is considered artillery, I believe. At least back in the day,
yeah, it's okay.
the artillery regiment is the owner of the high Mars rocket. At least it was that way in the Marine Corps.
Right.
So, but so a HIMARS rocket gets launched. What can you walk us through like what happens that renders that ineffective from
It's
from an electronic warfare
yeah,
capability?
it's using its GPS guidance, and the GPS is jammed, so it can't receive the signal. It doesn't know where it's going, and it goes off course.
So so a rocket goes off and the bad guy,
It loses its precision.
but the bad guys.
But let me say one thing though. HIMARS are the least bad case because they at least disperse cluster munitions. So
Mhm,
generally speaking, if they're trying to affect a big area, they've been able to use HIMARS to destroy stuff in that area. So HIMARS are the least bad of how things are going. Right
mhm.
now, the Excalibur artillery round, which is supposed to be, very precise, last I saw, it's now cost 1.9 million per kill because so many of them are missing.
Wow. But but back to my question though is
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
like one of these rockets goes off and
Mhm.
I mean what did the bad guys do? The bad guys like point
They
like a
jam the GPS. They
but
use a signal to overwhelm and jam the GPS and cut off the GPS.
huh,
So it can't find. It's like if I take you and you're trying to drive somewhere and I put a blindfold on you.
right, but you can just like point like a device point something at this rocket and it just like
Well,
confuses it.
you point it over an entire area. You basically black out an entire GPS area.
Ah.
So if you think about the cone, there's multiple cones going up so that the entire area is blacked out.
Mm.
So like the entire city of Kiev and surrounding area, GPS will not operate.
Ah, okay. All right.
So there is
All right.
no GPS. It is gone.
Uh.
It is not a factor.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, this is like a kind of a sidebar, but I've always wondered if this kind of a technology exists where like from space, like for satellite surveillance or any kind of surveillance for that matter, does technology exist where you can like fence off an area with electronic equipment and basically make it so that a small area, like say the size of a football field or something like that, is basically like blurred out from above.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's
And you can do all sorts of things. But then there's other guidance systems like GLONASS, which is the Russian guidance system. And so there's been countermeasures designed against all those things. But what they've also found is if they go up to certain altitudes, they can still get signals. So it's not as simple as all that. There's again, it's measure, countermeasure, countermeasure. And then each side has to respond with a different countermeasure as one countermeasure becomes ineffective. I mean, some of the things are as simple as, for example, on the Shaheeds, which are the Russians called Garans, they went from 4 antennas up to 32 antennas so that they could continue on their mission. And then when that didn't work, then they added other things like terrain mapping and then at the end, if it loses all contact, it actually has AI identification for going to the final terminal phase of targeting. So like when the Ukrainians launched Operation Spiderweb, which was all those drones that went out to the strategic aviation, those things could operate without without an operator on the other side because they were trained using AI where to land on those aircraft to destroy them.
Wow.
So they could operate autonomously.
That almost sounds a little bit like Stuxnet, almost a little bit, where the payload is tuned or
Trained to do its job on its own.
trained to seek out certain things and only engage when certain things have been found.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
But one thing that's very important to note is because this is a big ethical debate right now, is when a killing of a human is involved, there's always a human in the loop. So they're very direct on that front. But the other thing that's really quite insane about this, and I'm known for speaking my piece on the high cost of certain programs that don't necessarily deliver results because that's the norm we have in our government. It's not just information weapons or information programs or MISO or whatever that we spend too much money on, in my opinion. And people think I'm targeting at one particular program or whatever, but I'm not. It's a general problem. And if they notice when I do this thing, I'm usually comparing it to what they're doing in Ukraine. And this is another piece of that because it's become cost is a key factor in victory right now. And there's been this apocryphal story, which I found no evidence to prove it's true, that we used SM3s, SM4s, whatever, to shoot down $20,000 Shaheeds to defend Israel. I've found nothing that proved that to be at all accurate. But the fact is, we do have been developing interceptors for Shaheeds or Garans, which are these slow flying $10,000 to $30,000 drones that the Russians have developed with or built from Iranian technology. But the interceptors we've been developing run anywhere from $15,000 on up to under the current Army program that just recently came out, like 200,000. But makes absolutely no sense because the Ukrainians are innovating every day and have already developed some systems that range from a company called Tulip, which has a 3D printed little aircraft that goes after and knocks these things down for $200 to a whole range of platforms from General Cherry's Bullet, which is $1,000, to the Stinger, which is $1,000, to the Octopus, about $1,000. And the Sting, which is made by a company called Wild Hornets, actually took down what's called the Garan 3, which is a jet-powered Shaheed. So, the fact is, if you say you shoot something at a drone and it misses, well, you're going to double. So if you're going at, okay, let's say at the best case, it's 15,000, you miss, you go after it's 30,000. Well, you could shoot 30 of the Ukraine battle-proven interceptors at this thing and still be on top of the game because it really is very much a factor in Russian and Chinese thinking that the exquisite weapons that we build, which, oh, by the way, are not performing, they can afford to throw cheap technology away and just spend us into the ground.
Mm.
And we don't factor that in our weapons development programs. It's cost, schedule, performance, and that's a problem because right now, and the thing that frustrates me to no end is when I'm over in these Ukrainian technology conferences or whatever, there's nobody from the primes. I think out of 2,500 people were at the big event in December where they were showing off their modular components. I think there were maybe 6 to 10 Americans in there, if that, because we all kind of found each other, which by the way had to be held in a secret location so that the Russians didn't target it. But
Yeah.
and then when I went to the investment forum afterward, one of the things I do is advise an investment house called I'm on the technical advisory board of IronGate, which is a national security capital group, which a lot of people in the current administration used to belong to. There were no investors. There was like out of the people in the room,
Is
10
is
people.
is
Go ahead.
is Irongate like InQtel? Same
It
same.
works with NQTEL. The whole idea behind IronGate is they identify technologies that have promise, they invest in it, and then they help grow it into becoming a program of record.
Okay.
But just looking far into the future, most of the people there were fairly effective senior officials. And most of the investors are national security investors, and they hold an event where I usually end up speaking called Strength Through Innovation. And it's a event that has it brings together technologists, senior government leaders, and investors all in the same room to talk about issues. It's kind of like what Ukraine actually does with what's called the Brave One program.
Mm-hmm. What have we not covered, Josh, that you'd like to pass along to folks right now?
Goodness gracious. There are so many things. So really, I think the key thing is we need to sit down and really think about this. How do we in the US stay in the game? How do we stay in the information game? How do we stay in the technology game? How do we make ourselves effective when we have a well-established system of buying technology? And we have these people over in Ukraine, who the Europeans, by the way, these are cooperative programs, are gaining on us because we're not active. We're not part of this. So if you think back historically, our innovation, we got a lot of innovation out of the First World War with aviation and counter naval aviation. Second World War, we had the Manhattan Project. We had all that weapons development for us and advancements for us come from warfare. So a lot of the advancements today can trace their roots back to the Manhattan Project. And then the space race. We haven't had anything like this since the 70s. And so now the first major war of advanced Western powers is occurring. And it's changed warfare forever, but we don't have a dog in the fight in terms of being actively engaged. So we are not tapping into this wellspring of technology. I mean, the Ukrainians actually have a battlefield laboratory. So let me talk about the Brave One. Brave One program, in order to do this, the Ukrainians deregulated. And it's a program that involves all the government agencies, including called the Ministry of Digital Technology under Minister Fedorov. And they bring together investors, technologists, and the military, so that what they actually have, and this is what's amazing, they're receiving, it's almost like with our certain elements of our soft forces. The developers are receiving, and other people who work on these laboratories are receiving real-time feedback from the battlefield to improve their weapon systems, to improve their performance. And then within a week, or even in some cases overnight, the system has been modified to achieve the effect and overcome the countermeasure. Can you imagine? So one of the things I tell people is, and I guess I get surprised that some of our defense officials don't know about these things. And when I talk about it, they don't know about it. But, again, Ukraine is a country without a navy, and it defeated the Black Sea Fleet. It basically gave it an operational defeat. But one of the best stories I can tell is initially the big vulnerability that was detected on their drones was that the Mi-8 helicopters could take them out with their machine guns. Well, so what did they do? They put surface-to-air missiles on these platforms and took down 2 Mi-8s. Well, then the Russians thought, okay, well, we'll use Su-30 fighter bombers against these these things. Well, that was great too. Well, what they ended up doing was the Ukrainians put AIM-9 Sidewinders on these things and took out 2 Su-30s.
Mm.
So then they said, okay, well, now what do we need to achieve our mission of sinking these ships? Well, now we're vulnerable to guys with firearms and machine guns on the ships. So what they do, they put a machine gun on these things that fires the ship as it's coming in, and they use these things in part with each other, where it's almost like a little carrier battle group. And some of these things also have FPV drones with fiber optics, so they can go in and attack targets. I mean, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And one of the technologies, I think one of my biggest frustrations is, we just had this big counter UAS conference where we were all tapping each other's shoulder and saying how wonderful it was from a homeland security perspective. Yet from the readouts I've gotten is no one talked about the lessons learned from Ukraine. And here it is being fought on a society that's frankly just as advanced as we are, if not more so. And we're spending thousands and if not millions of dollars to try to solve problems that have already been solved. My favorite technology I saw in Ukraine this last time was a turret. So we're, point defense from drones is a big deal. Everybody's trying to figure out how to do it. And the drug cartels right now have people who have apparently learned the lessons of Ukraine and are employing this and can employ them against us should they choose. But this turret is $35,000 a pop. Was actually on one of these drones, waterborne drones, and also used on land, is deployed with like 30, 40 units in Ukraine. And it deals with both helicopters and any close-in targets, to include drones, using a 7.62 round. How cheap is that?
That is very cheap.
And it's solved the problem that we're probably investing, I don't know, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in. So rather than go and feed at the trough of Ukraine, and the funny thing is the Ukrainians desperately want to share it with us, not for their own edification or investment purposes, which of course is a factor, but they genuinely want to show the United States that they are very, very thankful and appreciative of all the support. I mean, you can't walk the streets of Ukraine and even run into an old lady, and when she finds out you're American, says, "Thank you so much for your help. Thank you so much. We really deeply appreciate it." It's actually very moving, but they want to share this, but we're not even going to the trough to feed. And it's very, very frustrating that you would think that the big primes would be there and looking at these things, and they're not. They're just absolutely not. And in the room when we had all the investors the following day after components, they asked how many people in that room had invested in Ukraine. This was Europeans and Americans. Probably 10, 15 people had invested. And there's an American fund, I think it's called the Defender Fund, that's based in New York, run by a former Wall Street guy. So, I mean, if you look at the future, this is really, and you look at how our arms industry has developed, if we don't, my fear, John, is if we don't embrace this right now, this reminds me a lot of when I was younger, of the steel industry, the AI. People kept saying, oh, we're never going to lose steel. We're never going to lose shipbuilding. We're never going to lose the chip war. Well, we have, because we became complacent.
Yeah. Well, we pre-gamed before this just a little bit, and you said that the necessity is the motherhood of, or is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
Is fitting here. And you also mentioned just a few moments ago that our defense industrial complex has not been stress tested, or has not been forced into innovating at speed in the same way the Ukrainians have here recently. But
absolutely,
you said that there's a fitting analogy with what happened during COVID, at least. Are there any lessons that could be learned from our innovation during COVID that can apply today?
Well, Operation Warp Speed, we did a lot very quickly there with Operation Warp Speed, but the things
that was also based, being forced into change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's what we kind of have to do. The SEC war has said we're on a war footing. Well, we better darn well take it as we're on a war footing.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, I mean, being somewhat skeptical, and I'll talk about another piece of this in a minute, but we really do. And again, as I said, people tend to tease me about it, but and I really am not picking on individual organizations. I really do have an issue with competitiveness and effectiveness. Cost, schedule, performance. Well, performance matters, cost matters.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to have a very perverted idea of what cost is. So,
well, this is a demonstration. I'm sorry to interrupt,
yeah, go ahead.
Bugsy, but this is a vivid real world demonstration that information related capabilities can be quite economical.
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
the cheapest is frankly speaking, EW. And it makes a big difference. I mean, the US is now moving towards some directed energy weapons and things, and that's great because those are pennies by the shot. The Israelis are using that. But when we look at this thing, this is one where really, if we don't change the way we do business. I mean, I remember the V-22 Osprey program, and I worked for Senator Specter back in the day. And, the Marine Corps at the time really didn't want this platform, but it was forced down their throat by Congress. And we're in a position now where, okay, every congressman wants to drive money to their district. The investors want the firms to get this money and to charge the government X number of things. And the way our prime system works is the subcontractor and subcontractor each have their chops, so that by the point that you actually get the product delivered, it's going to it's like the metaphor of the $10,000 toilet seat. The problem is you can't do that anymore. It just doesn't work. And that can survive in a system where there's no competition, but now there is competition, and we're back into the paradigm of the steel industry, where really the modern battlefield, our competitors and our adversaries are actually doing things that we ourselves can't do. So imagine the fight against China, should that ever occur. They have been in the middle of this war in Ukraine and pulling everything out, where Russia has basically become a proxy state of China. And they're learning all this in algorithmic warfare and in anything you can imagine. They are drawing all of this out of Russia, as is Iran, as is North Korea. But we're sitting back saying, look at us as the industrial powerhouse. Well, for us to remain as an industrial powerhouse, here we have somebody willing to invite us into their buffet just as a sign of gratitude, and to help our investors make money and help our defense industry improve. And yet we're not even walking up and taking a bite. And I don't understand it. And I've seen, I've spent I'm 57 now. I've spent almost 40 years since I was an intern in the defense world, as a military officer, as a national security policy guy, and now as a consultant, and soon be hopefully back in the Pentagon. But this is one of those things where we're in a game-changing moment, and if we don't recognize it, and our industries adjust, that we're going to be made irrelevant. That's my fear. I mean, it sounds rather alarmist, but when I see the technologies that these guys have over there, I mean, imagine a company that's producing, and this is another thing, I think you and I talked about it earlier. How would somebody at the Pentagon react if somebody came in with a long-range cruise missile that was made of styrofoam, coated in that kind of plastic stuff you get on like a water cooler, and said that this is our new long-range strike stealth weapon, but you can have it for $800?
How would someone react to that?
In the Pentagon, how do you think they would react to that?
I think they would probably first be skeptical or disbelieving, but then hopefully they'd be curious and wanting to know more about how this can be deployed.
I hope so. I would say probably before Ukraine, if I came in with a styrofoam cruise missile, I would have been laughed out of existence and it probably wouldn't meet the requirements or the basic specs.
Right.
I'm hoping that the lessons learned from Ukraine actually change that because, in fact, one of the most effective weapon systems coming or companies coming out of this war is a company called Firepoint. And I encourage everybody to read up on it. But they're long, a lot of it just happens to be that styrofoam and plywood are wonderful stealth materials. They're lightweight, they're very, very cheap, and you can build weapons that can go a long way. And if you think about it, why are we investing all this money on these carbon composites when we can just be making it out of styrofoam or plywood? If you're going to create a weapon that you're going to use in relatively short order, that's whole purpose is to destroy itself anyway.
Wow.
And if you expect something to be shot down along the way, instead of shooting down $100,000 missile, why don't you shoot down an $800 missile? But they'll still get through. And so that's the mentality that the Ukrainians are using. They're actually building systems out of styrofoam and plywood for stealth characteristics, as are the Russians.
Yeah.
And we need to learn from that because guess what? Bang is still bang, explosion is still explosion, penetration is still penetration.
Yeah.
But they do it at a fraction, at 100th of the cost.
Huh.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I neglected to mention just a moment ago. We'll have links in the show notes to the Brave One Ukrainian Defense Innovation ecosystem. There's a link for that, and also to Firepoint Weapons. I just looked that up. We'll have a link.
It is pretty darn cool, isn't it?
Yeah,
because they actually have they're developing a clone to the Russian S-400, which is the close to the state of the art of their anti-aircraft and counter missile batteries, and it's going to come out at a significantly lower cost because one of the things that they do, and this is one of the things I really love about Brave One, and I actually just had this discussion before I got on this call with a senior Pentagon official, is we tend to eat from the same trough all the time. You know, we have the same primes competing for the same contracts, just in different formulations. Well, the whole point is how do you add new ingredients to that trough and have new primes enter the fight? Well, what you do is you create a grant program where you create a micro grant where you smoke out these real innovative technologies from universities or some genius guy who just has a brilliant idea, like more cowbell. You like that?
Nailed it. Yes.
But you give them the money to sort of grow their concept and test it out. And then once they prove that this thing is viable, then you start the contract process. But right now in our market, it's almost cost prohibitive for somebody to do something like that. In Ukraine, they have I think 8,000 technologies on the Brave One website. And a lot of these are new companies. And one of the things that's going to be very interesting is when this war is over, the most popular thing to study in school right now, like when you and I were kids, being an astronaut was a big deal. Kids today, they don't even think about being an astronaut. STEM and design and drones and unmanned systems are what the young people in college are studying today in Ukraine because of the war. So their tech base was very robust before the war. And now it's going to be even stronger. And when they come out of this thing, hopefully soon, they're going to be positioned to really be a leader in the European defense industry. And I frankly wouldn't want to compete with them because, again, now the question everybody asks before they go after a weapons system, even in our US government, is has it been battle tested in Ukraine? And Brave One offers that opportunity for technologies that go over there to actually test your equipment in battle, which is amazing.
All right. Well,
yeah, sorry.
No, it's good. So I think you're ringing a bell for people to pay attention and to get onto, I mean, not just say we're on a war footing, but get on a war footing. And you're pointing to some models for innovation and opportunities for us to partner with organizations in Ukraine which are doing doing all of the above that you're suggesting. So,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
John, think about it this way. The costliest thing in the world is blood. And these people are giving, this is, whether people agree or not, this is our war. Okay. When we look in the mirror, when we were young, we thought, okay, somebody attacks my country, I'm going to go out, pick up a gun and defend my country, right? That's the whole premise behind having arms, etc. Well, in this, can you imagine people in our legislative branch going out, picking up a weapon and defending the country, quitting their work, and literally the next day being out on a front line? That's the culture over there for these guys. I mean, if you want to look at true Minuteman culture like we had in our country, that's what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is they have the ability to do it. It may be in trench warfare, World War I, but above them is 21st century unmanned technology changing dramatically every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty awesome yet heartbreaking thing to see, because each time I go back to Ukraine, one less person I knew is available because they were killed on the front.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sucks.
Wow. All right. Well, here we are in the holiday season 2025 with thanks Josh for a stark but important reminder of where we are today and where we need to get ASAP. So
That's right.
with that, Dr. Josh Segal, thank you so much for sharing your insights and perspective on the cognitive.
You got it, buddy.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.